Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. I think it's time we finally tackle another one of those projects that's been on my to-build list for years. I've got this new Ender 3 V3 in the workshop that Creality very kindly sent over, and I figured a great way to put this machine to the test would be to finally make C-3PO's head. I've already printed a few pieces on it, mostly just boring organization stuff that I needed around the shop just to make sure everything was in working order. Also this filament bracket that moved the spool holder from the side facing this way, more to the front here. There's nothing really wrong about how it was originally mounted. It just tends to be one of those things that I change on every single one of my 3D printers because where the filament rolls are typically being stored doesn't always work for where these machines are going to be living permanently in my workshop. So just by moving this filament roll to the front and being able to rotate how it's being stored 90 degrees, it really slimmed down the profile of this machine, and also I think it's going to be a lot easier for me in the future to be able to get these rolls on and off. You know me, when I have a new printer to play around with, I like trying to put it immediately to practical use with a prop project. C-3PO's head is something I've wanted to make for a long time, and the pieces should fit great on this machine. Quite a few of you have also requested seeing me build him as well. So today is finally the day, let's get printing. 3PO's head is actually a pretty quick print project. The main head is only 3 pieces. You've got the front, the back, and the neck. I decided to start off with the back piece. The back is a bit tall for the printer, so I split the bottoms of these corners from the main piece directly in Creality print. I could have angled the print so that it would fit easier, but I like the idea of this piece printing in this upright orientation, and attaching the small cut parts back onto the main piece will be super simple later. I'll be printing all of my pieces in PETG to make sanding easier for myself. Everything with the print seemed to be going smoothly, but when I took it off of the printer, you could see that it had some weird textured spots. Also this random line where it looks like it didn't extrude filament, not sure what happened there, but I'm going to be doing a ton of post-processing on this piece, so these things can easily be fixed later on. But I know this printer should be capable of much better quality prints than this. I decided to tackle a smaller piece next to see if I could tweak some settings to improve the surface quality, so I went with the neck piece, and this somehow went even worse. To be fair, this piece is only 2 or 3 walls thick, so it really is going to show any possible issues that a printer may have, but this piece had random artifacts and stringing and just overall a lot of problems. A lot of problems that look to be the slicer's fault as opposed to the printer's fault. Up until this point, I'd been using Creality print as it was the only slicer with an actual Ender 3 V3 profile. I have been using Orca Slicer for my KE though, with great success, so I decided to try out the slicer profile I've been using for that machine to see if we could get some better print results. There are quite a lot of differences between the V3 and KE, so I didn't even know if it would print at all, since they technically use a completely different motion system, with this printer being a Core XZ, but thankfully the printer started up fine and everything seemed to be going smoothly. So here is the front of 3PO's head. This one looks remarkably better compared to what the back looks like in terms of like surface quality on these walls. It does seem to have done way better of a job than Creality print did, so even if it's not like completely optimized for this printer, it's still an improvement. The only thing was the top got a bit of a weird texture, and of course I'm willing to be a little more lenient because I really don't know how well the slicer profile is doing with this machine and what it might not be compensating for and whatever. So this texture up here, I wasn't sure what caused it, if it was something to do with the slicer or whatever, because the inside, which you probably can't really see because of these supports here, I'm gonna take these off, which you can just see how easy those supports were to remove. Of course, black filament is just so easy to film. The inside of this, where there was like no supports, it was really just right here. It looks pretty clean, so it's not like the inside was so messed up that it was starting to affect the outside, or at least that's what it seemed like. So I went ahead and printed another one on another printer. I changed printer, but I didn't change the file itself, and it just looks like the model. Of course, white filament is also the worst one to film. It just looks like this particular model has some more noticeable polygons on the top of the dome. So this texture definitely could be improved, but a lot of that is that polygon texture because this is like a absolutely flawless print, and you can see where those like square polygons are that start forming the dome of the head. So if you just ignore his like top of the head and like sort of forehead there, this print is pretty flawless in terms of wall quality, smoothness. There's really not a lot of ringing or anything, so the vibration compensation's doing great for that. These supports were wildly unnecessary that it put on, so that was the only thing that I changed between this one and the white one, is I just got rid of needing the supports there. And here's the back of the head for an example. Again, it might be a little hard to see on camera because this filament is so shiny to just see the wall texture, but even on the top of this one, it starts doing that like weird wrinkly texture. I don't even know what you would call it. It's like old skin. And this one doesn't really seem to have that. It just has those square polygons that you can see more visible there. This is probably never going to show up on camera, but if I look at it at the right angle, I literally can see almost, it's not even vibration lines, it's moire lines, I would say, because they're really even, and it shouldn't be doing it because this printer does have vibration compensation, and on this one it doesn't have that at all. I'm probably never gonna get that to show up on camera, so you're gonna have to trust me on it. So yes, the clear winner in terms of quality for slicing is Orca Slicer. It's not even like I'm trying to be a crazy Orca Slicer fanatic, it's just that Creality print is butchering the possible quality that this printer can have, which really sucks. Because, you know, overall, other than it being done in a different filament, these two look about the same level of quality. You know, prints really don't get much cleaner than these two. There's like nothing super terrible about either of them. So this is actually the last piece that I need for my 3PO head display. I'm gonna resin print some of the finer details and like the eyes and stuff. There's really not many pieces to making a head, so if you want a quick like weekend project, this could be something fun. I guess we can go ahead and start removing the support material, see how well that goes for this one, because that could be interesting. Yeah, just go from there for post-processing. Thankfully, the supports did come off very easily on all of these pieces, even the back piece. I did use organic support for everything, which tends to be a lot more easy to remove anyway. And the overhangs and surface quality where the supports were overall pretty clean as well. Then it was on to the sanding, which of course I had to use my handy dandy foot sander that I'm sure you're sick of hearing me talk about by now, but this thing is an absolute lifesaver when it comes to sanding 3D prints, and I will absolutely not start a sanding job on anything without it. I did still unfortunately have to go in with some sandpaper just to do some touch-ups in some smaller areas, but this is what the pieces overall looked like before I started the first round of filler primer. I always do 2 decently thick coats of filler primer before I go back to sanding anything. And I will say, after the first round of filler primer, these pieces actually weren't looking too terrible. So once I've let the filler primer dry for a while, I normally go in with 180 grit sandpaper and do hand sanding all over the pieces. There were some deeper imperfections, so I went in with my UV resin filler mix and filled those in. It was mostly on the chin for the head, where there was a lot of support material holding up the entire piece, but there were also some more obvious layer lines on the top where that texture started showing through more. The back actually sanded down pretty smoothly, but where that one line was, it definitely needed a little more work. Once I've got a couple of coats of resin filler on, I sand that all down before going in with another couple of layers of filler primer. At this point, these pieces actually looked pretty good, so I gave it a final sand of 400 grit. The neck piece I ended up gluing together as well so that it was solid. I believe it split so that you could actually wear this model as a costume, so I just glued it and then added some resin to brace the seam. And at this point I also got all of these small detail pieces printed in resin. Again, there's not very many of these. You've got the neck bolts, the back bolt, and then the eye pieces. I decided it would probably be easiest to paint everything separately. Other than this back bolt detail, I glued that on before starting the priming. I'll be using the Alclad gloss black base for this because I'm gonna want these pieces to be super chrome. Obviously, there's a lot of ways that you can go about making 3PO gold, but I'm gonna be going with the dyeing or recoloring of chrome method. So in order for this to work, you really need to start with a flawless glossy black base. Next was onto the actual chrome paint. I used Alclad chrome for this. Alclad tends to be a bit more reflective than Alumiluster or Duralumin, although I'm sure either of those options would give a great final effect as well. One thing when you are doing such a flawless chrome finish is you really want to have a good grip on what you're painting. Like, you do not want to be handling it with your actual hands, so you'll see me using a lot of popsicle sticks and pieces stuck to popsicle sticks. For the larger head pieces, I used a couple of these plastic handles that I normally use to paint Ahsoka star maps. I stuck them together and then actually stuck them onto the head pieces. A thicker dowel should also work similarly. To turn this chrome into gold, I decided that I wanted to try this food coloring method in which you mix in some food coloring into a clear base. So I used the Alclad Aqua Gloss Clear, but I'm not going to get too into it because I can confidently say you should absolutely never do this. It at first looked like it was going okay, it gave a really nice gold effect, but it is super unstable and just starts dripping and making a mess everywhere, and I can tell you that the second that I have a free weekend, this head is getting repainted into something that is not gold because I absolutely hate how it looks in real life. So please use alcohol ink like I should have, or literally just any other method other than this one to recolor your chrome gold. But after that gold painting fiasco, it was on to working on the electronics. I decided to rig up this super simple light system for the eyes using 3 warm white colored LED diodes for each eye, so 6 in total. You can see in reference photos that C-3PO has like pretty distinct, like a tri-light in his eye, so I figured this would probably be the easiest method to do this. These were 12 volt LED diodes, so I ran them all parallel off of a 9 volt battery. Really nothing fancy, a little bit of soldering. I didn't even like really properly finish it. I just added some electrical tape because I have a feeling in the future I might actually look at putting in a switch and maybe making a more proper base. But for a somewhat temporary setup, this worked perfectly at getting some LEDs into the eyes. After that, all I did was add 3 blobs of hot glue onto the backs of the eye lenses and then just stuck the ends of the LED diodes into those. And this actually ended up looking perfect. Even though the lenses were printed in translucent resin is never completely translucent, so it has a bit of a frosting that really nicely diffused the light. After that, I just slid the lenses into the outer eye casing. I just clicked them into place for now because, again, plan on repainting this. And after that, it was sliding those eyepieces into the eye sockets of the rest of the head. And here is C-3PO's finished head. I hope you enjoyed seeing the process of building C-3PO. I could definitely see myself looking at building the entire body in the future, or even a custom protocol droid, so if that's something you would like to see, let me know in the comments. But I wanted to wrap this video up by talking a little bit more about this printer now that I've had more experience with using it. Right off the bat, I will say the machine itself I do really like. It is a very high quality feeling machine, definitely the most high quality Ender 3 that I've used. In fact, I would go so far as to say it doesn't even really feel like an Ender 3 because it's such a breakaway from all previous models. It feels and looks like an entirely other class of 3D printer. I don't know how else really to describe it other than I really like the printer's vibes, like the frame design. I know it's like essentially pretty much like a useless feature, but the LED lights that are in the hot end that light up the logo, it's just a nice touch. Like, this printer just has nice touches that make it feel like a very fancy and well thought out printer, whereas a lot of previous Ender 3 models, you know, throughout the years, they felt a lot more hobbyist, I guess would be the best way to put it. And just overall, this printer has a very clean look. The cable management is great. It's about the cleanest that it can get. It's really just these 2 ropes of cord, one for the bed and one for the extruder. Print bed's really nice. Bed adhesion was great. The touchscreen on this printer and the user interface, again, really nice. It's kind of crazy how much of an upgrade it feels over the KE. You know, the KE also has a touch screen, but this one is way more like a smartphone screen. Like, it is a very high quality touch screen, whereas the KE one, like, it's a very nice printer and screen, but just for my eyes, like, it looks like the touch screen equivalent of like what is on my Ender 3 V2s. Like, it does the job, no complaints, but the screen feels, again, very high-end. There wasn't anything in terms of like a touch sensitivity and control and like things accidentally being hit. So the touchscreen itself feels very accurate from what I was using it for. And I will say I'm actually a pretty big fan of the Nebula camera. I wasn't sure what I would really think of this. Typically I just use like other smart home monitoring cameras, like a Wisecam or something. Typically I'm monitoring printers in a dark room. You know, I'm not in my workshop, so there's no lights on, and I'm wanting to check on what the progress is from somewhere else. So low light and infrared capabilities are pretty important, and this camera seemed to have held up very well. And I'm a big fan of the time-lapse videos that you can have it automatically create. I'm not sure how much of a useful feature that would be to a lot of people. You know, for me, I'm constantly filming these videos, so having time-lapse footage of print jobs finishing is very handy for me. But for the average person, it might be interesting, but maybe more of a gimmick that after you see the time-lapse videos that it can create a couple of times, you sort of forget about it and don't bother with it anymore. It is also supposed to have AI features built in that can detect a print failure, and I believe when it does, it will automatically pause the printer and alert you. I didn't have any print failures this week, so I didn't get alerted to anything, but if it does work, that obviously would be extremely helpful, and I can only imagine that that is something that becomes more accurate over time as well. Oh, and the Nebula camera isn't like exclusively to work with the V3, it also works with the other new Ender 3 models like the SE and KE. One thing that could maybe be improved upon would be a second USB port. I know there's a big emphasis on remotely sending your print jobs to the printer, but not everyone likes doing that or doesn't have great Wi-Fi, and I'm sure there's still a decent amount of people that prefer to put all of their slice files on a USB stick. And because this machine only has the one USB port, if you have the camera plugged in, you have to unplug that to plug in your USB stick. And then of course, when you actually want to start the print and monitor it, you'll have to unplug the USB stick to plug the camera back in. So having a second USB port or like a dedicated camera USB port plug-in could be a great additional feature. But of course, after all of these positives, we have to talk about the one glaring negative that I'm sure is no surprise since it plagued most of this video, and that is this printer's current slicer situation. It really cannot be overstated just how unfortunate it is that this machine is being hampered by a bad slicer, because the machine itself is excellent, and I can only think about how many people might decide for this to be their first printer, or even just somebody that isn't like so into 3D printing that they make it their entire pastime and they see the slicer that is recommended to be used for this machine, download it, and when those prints start coming out not at the best quality, it doesn't even occur to them that it's possibly the slicer and not the machine itself. It benefits even the most knowledgeable of us in 3D printing for things to work as smoothly as possible. So the idea that Creality decided to make their own slicer to try and ease along the process of somebody starting out 3D printing is great. I think Creality slicer as a concept, it's a very simple slicer. It would be excellent for somebody starting out 3D printing. But when the slicer itself is the cause of these random artifacts that show up on print jobs and it just not slicing as efficiently as it should. I don't know if I've had the chance to really mention it yet in the video, but when I was watching this printer print those first pieces, I could see how it wasn't doing a smooth transition on the curve. Curved pieces do seem to be the one problem that Creality print has the issue with slicing, because on my initial pieces that I printed with this before filming this video, like the filament holder and the other odd bits and bobs, they were all very straight pieces, and those prints were super clean and nice looking. So it's the arcs and circles that Creality print right now seems to have an issue with, and when I was watching it, like, you could see the jaggediness, so I thought it might be due to the line deviation, which is a setting I'm sure no one has ever heard of. But back in the olden days of 3D printing, if you wanted your models to look smoother and you kept on having like zits and blobs on the surface, an easy way to fix that would be to change the maximum resolution and line deviation. So when the model has all of these different points along its surface, it would smooth that out more so that the machine wasn't pausing for like really minute periods of time and creating this like jaggedy look. So that is initially what I thought this machine was doing. So I changed the line deviation for that first neck piece, and we all know how badly that went. Add to the fact that it still seemed to be doing that jaggedy, like not smooth transition that once I flipped to Orca completely went away. Like, it was doing the smooth and gradual movements that I would expect this machine to be doing, or just like in general any printer. I suppose the one good thing is that a slicer issue issue is a whole lot easier to fix than a machine issue. And as far as I can tell, there's nothing about this machine that is affecting its print quality. It is completely down to that slicer. So if you are somebody that has a newer Creality printer and have been using Creality print and maybe aren't the biggest fan of the surface quality of your prints, maybe change the slicer, because that might be all it comes down to. And that's why this is a bit of a mixed bag in terms of reviews for machines, because again, the machine itself, great, love it. The slicer is letting it down so badly, and that is something that I fully expect to be fixed in the future. In fact, by the time you're watching this video, there might be a proper Ender 3 V3 profile in Orca Slicer, or there might be a new update for Creality print that fixes any of those artifacts that seem to show up on print jobs. So overall, I think this machine has a lot of potential. It's just unfortunately right now being severely let down by its slicer options. I'm definitely not giving up on this printer. It's still gonna get a lot of use in my workshop. Even though it doesn't have a proper slicer profile, it seems to be functioning just fine with the KE profile. But I am very interested to see what a proper V3 profile in Orca Slicer does with this machine, and how it possibly even improves the print quality further. And for now, that concludes my thoughts on the Ender 3 V3. Let me know if you'd like an update in the future on this printer once I've had even more experience using it, and also possibly once there are proper slicer profiles or updates to slicers. But that is everything. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.